bandwidth yeah, so maybe let me turn off the videos so that make sure that so you're able to see the screen, what I'm sharing?
It's yes.
Are you able to see, Aradhita, what I'm sharing?
Yes, I can see
the translational research.
Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay, let me get started. So I wanted to shine upon a few of the thinking process within Intel so that you get a glimpse into how industry looks at a very changing landscape in the healthcare and life sciences space, right? In the past decade or so, there has been a lot of changes that's happening slowly and steadily, right? In terms of the amount of information, the data and the insights, and all the way leading to better disease screening, diagnosis, and therapeutics, right? So I will take this as a sort of a case study to see how company like Intel has sort of transformed over a period of time, right? And that's the topic. And also, as I speak through, I would also link it to the kind of fundings that Intel has been making in the space of healthcare and life sciences, so that you get an idea of the involvement of Intel with the ecosystem and the industry by large. Now, what I would cover in this presentation is composed of 3 parts. The first part is to look into the traditional Intel R&D approach in healthcare and life sciences, and I'll give you a glimpse with few examples what Intel did. And what is the new approach that Intel R&D is picking up in HLS space? And again, I'll draw your attention to a couple of examples here. And then towards the end, what is the takeaway for the ecosystem collaborators like yourself, right? So that puts things in perspective. A compute company, right? And that's whenever people talk about compute, that's the relationship that one tries to make, right? And then compute has pervaded into all aspects of life.
Hi, we can't hear you. Are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Yeah, seems to be some connection issue. Is the share still on? The screen share?
Yes, it's still on,
okay.
But it's not full screen. You can go to the slide show mode.
That's strange. Is it full screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So I would spend a few slides and 10 minutes or so on the traditional Intel approach, right? In terms of how we operated in health and life science space. This slide sort of gives you an idea of the kind of use cases that we were going after, the kind of industries that we partnered with. Things like radiology, digital pathology, robotic surgeries, genomic analysis, drug discovery, and a bunch of other emerging use cases. Together with industry, you can look at the medtech industry like GE, Siemens, and also the genomic companies like Illumina genomic research institutions, Broad Institute, for example, and so on, right? The thought process in Intel was to how we can intervene with Intel products, compute products in the healthcare space, right? So to try and understand the health and life science domain-specific capabilities, like DICOM as an example. What does it mean to get analyze and get deeper insight with machine learning, deep learning, using DICOM images. One of the things that we have been doing also with definitional partners is to build federated learning concept, incubate solutions. So recently we, put forth the OpenFL, which is, open source federated learning, which we designed using definitional partners, which is UPenn, University of Pennsylvania. We worked with pathfinding work on digital pathology with a customer, wherein in digital pathology, you can imagine that the images are pretty large, right, in old slide images. And traditional approach was to tile them. And because of memory constraints within the implementation, people used to tile them. When you make tiles of the big image, then you get into artifacts. And we worked with a pathfinding customer here to find out how we can do this for the whole image as opposed to a tile, and that thereby improving the quality of the insights that you can get. We also all the way go up to advocacy in terms of AI policy worldwide, right, in the space of health and life sciences. And here is an example with the FDA that have been instrumental in providing our advice as time progressed. So if you look at all of these approaches that we have taken, whether it's a definitional partner for creating a federated learning, or with pathfinding with customers to come up with better solutions for digital pathology-based insights, and so on, the fundamental approach was to how can we come up with standardized way of doing things, right? Wherein standardization helps us to do one execution with a customer, with a pathfinding customer, and then extrapolating and use it for other customers, as you can imagine, right? So we work with GE and then use the same technology that we learned in working with other customers like Siemens and so on. Now, this approach, the core thing was how do we sell our silicon, right? Which has been the Intel's bread and butter, right? But in the space of health and life sciences, silicon is probably a smaller fraction of 1% of the healthcare market, right? Smaller fraction of 1%, right? So that's really insignificant. So one of the things that we have been doing is how we can go up in the value chain, right, to move beyond just selling silicon to get into services, right? So, but before I go there, let me just give you a snapshot of some of the things that we have achieved in the past 10 years or so. So this is a slide. Aradhita, feel free to stop me in case you're not able to hear me, right?
We can hear you now.
Because okay. Yeah, sometimes the internet is flaky, so I just want to make sure. So this slide sort of gives you an idea of a GATK toolkit that we worked with. It's a genome analysis toolkit that we worked with Broad Institute as in the late part of 2016. And one of the intent is for short read sequencing, the bioinformatics pipeline, that's where the GATK plays a role, how we can come up with efficient implementation of it in using Intel server class Xeon processors. And that led us to come up with solution with Broad Institute that made it available on all kind of major cloud platforms. This is one successful collaboration that we had with a research institution in order to standardize bioinformatics pipeline. And at that point in time, short read was still, the main, I would say, genomic pipeline, right? Now, in the recent 2 years, the penetration of long read, that is sort of redefining the landscape in the genomic, at least for the microorganisms as opposed to human genome. Now, the other example that I can cite is OpenVINO model server. So you're all familiar with tons of models with AI, machine learning, deep learning, that are getting generated based on multimodal health data. And people are looking to see how they can deploy these models in a variety of end scenarios, some of which could be a mobile-based app to a desktop app to a cloud-based app. But all of these, you want to help the model builder in such a way that they don't really care what's the underlying platform on which it runs. And in order for us to, extract or abstract away the underlying hardware, Intel created device plugins called OpenVINO device plugins and OpenVINO inference engines, so that you don't care whether it's a CPU or a GPU or a VPU, whatever be the processing unit underlying, you are able to, map your inference algorithm seamlessly and efficiently, right, to the underlying hardware platform. And this is something that we created as part of an engagement with the definitional partner, GE Healthcare, right? So that's about the OpenVINO model server. One of the recent things that we did, and this is still work in progress, is the concept of federated learning. We have created something called OpenFL, which is again an open source federated learning approach where, as you know, that institutions which hold data, which is typically the hospitals, right, as indicated here, institution ABC, and these are data that's lying in silos and very difficult to extract the data. Sometimes it's either because of privacy or security reasons, people do not want to export data, but also the size of data in some cases can be large, right? Image data, digital pathology image data, or even a genomic data, they're pretty large in size. Now, instead of moving the data, can we move the compute to the place where the data is? And that's possible when, let's say that you build a model based on open data set in a centralized manner. Let's call this a global model. You then push the global model to each of these institutions where additional data are present based on which you want to learn locally, right? And each institution then uses that global model to adapt the model based on the local data at institution A, B, and C, and then send out only the model updates to an aggregator parameter server, which then consolidates all the models that come from institutions A, B, and C, and then generates a single global model, which then percolates back in a cycle that we can go through a number of times. Now, this has helped sort of democratize the process of learning from institutions that can be geographically spread across the globe, right? In fact, an engagement that we have with the University of Penn, there is an underlying, there is a program that's currently underway, which includes institutions in excess of 70 across the globe, right? To build up models in decentralized manner, and then aggregate these model updates in a centralized manner, and be able to learn from these different data sets that are coming from 70 odd locations, right? So this is another area that we work with the university to come up with a framework, which is an open source framework that helps institutions to build models and retrain models in a much more efficient way. Another recent one that we did, and this is with a company called Mila in Canada, where Mila is basically trying to look at new drug molecules. So these are small molecule drugs designs, and they basically are churning the ocean of chemistry, right, to find new drug molecules which are not there and that can be synthesized and that has good drug properties, and all of this identification of these new drug molecules are done through computational methods. So if you look at the problem statement here, instead of doing experimental work to find out new guys have sort of converted the problem into a computational problem and trying to solve through computation, identifying new drug molecules which can be either repurposing existing drug molecules or find new drug molecules that have a deeper impact on various disease conditions, right? And this is a ongoing collaboration with Mila, and the kind of compute that these guys are looking at is petaflop and beyond, right? And that interests Intel as well. And one of the things that we did in the last 2 years of COVID, which you can imagine, is Intel committed about $50 million towards a pandemic response. And one of the things that we did also together with IGIB, CSIR, which you can see being acknowledged in this subtext in the bottom right, where we had funds based on this grant for the pandemic response that CSIR, can we, based on the data that we collect, multimodal data, RT-PCR, genomic data, can we do risk stratification of the patients, which can help in hospital admissions, whether are these cases severe enough that they need hospital admissions, or they can just get well staying at home. This is an effort that Intel did with several institutions, research, government, private, across the globe, right? Spending 50 million funds, starting from things which are medical devices that were in acute need, right? Ventilators and so on, to all the way up to understanding the COVID genome to come up with the risk stratification strategies, right? So by and large, if you look at the examples that I've shared so far, right, the intent of Intel in the past decade or so has been to look at healthcare and life sciences, and the same way they look at other verticals, to identify standardized workloads which they then try to optimize and run efficiently on the heterogeneous Intel hardware, thereby being able to sell more of their hardware to the verticals that they are working with, right? So that's been the standard approach, and there is a shift, and that's happening, and I will explain what that shift is with the new approach. And taking an example of drug discovery, an emerging drug discovery paradigm, right? And how also, putting the patient at the center of the medical R&D in coming up with efficient drug discovery approaches, but also how you can come up with the population scale screening programs that Intel is involved in, where you can get into precision diagnostics and therapeutics. I'll touch upon these use cases, which will shed some light into how collaborators like yours can position yourself in any engagements together with Intel and its ecosystem. As you all know, the drug discovery cycle is a pretty long and arduous, right? It takes on an average about 10 years, on an average about $1.5 billion to bring any new drug into the market, right? And that's the reason why, because of the cost and time, you get to see about 30 plus drugs on an average getting out through the FDA pipeline. Now, all that is changing, right? And that's happening now with AI. And this is sort of a use case which is very interesting for Intel, because if you look at this pipeline of drug discovery, which is decomposed, as you can imagine, into primary pharmacology, secondary pharmacology, in vivo animal, and then in vivo human, right? If you look at it all across the pipeline, starting from identifying the target drugs, meaning targets to focus on, and what are the hit lead molecules that bind to the target, and the lead optimization, taking them into animal study, and then later into human. All through, you will see use of AI playing a critical role, right? That's illustrated in the top row, wherein every function is intervention. And precisely because of this, that companies like InSilico, right? InSilico is a company which recently got a huge funding, $250 million investment about 7-8 months ago, which is a new age pharma, if you will, wherein they use AI from the initial target identification to the hit molecule identification, to refinement of the hit molecule, until you get into the animal and human studies, right? And this helped them in many ways. They're able to reduce the cost, right, significantly, which can go through clinical trials in under $15 million. This is compared to $1.5 billion that I showed you in the previous slide. And it takes under less than 3 years to get to a new drug molecule, right? As opposed to, 10 plus years. And they have currently doing a clinical trial for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And as they were doing the clinical trial, they started already looking at solutions, drug molecules for kidney fibrosis, right? And this can become like a machine now to come up with precision medicine with taking in inputs of multimodal data as their primary input to identify the key target or causal target to focus on. So the multimodal data that they take in is clinical data, laboratory data, genomic data, imaging data, and based on which they identify the causal targets. Once you've identified the causal targets, then they get into their AI-based pipeline to identify the ligand or the lead molecule that can bind to the target, right? And this is exactly what companies like Intel are looking to work into the world in the realm of computational work, right? Which is a lot more tractable, a lot cheaper, and faster. You can put in more compute and be able to accelerate the process of identifying new therapies for various disease conditions. Now, as I mentioned, the input that these kind of new age pharma companies take in is a multimodal data set, right? Which is a mix of clinical, laboratory, genomic, and imaging data. Now, this basically means that they would need access to such a data set from different representations from different geographical locations across the globe. And that's not an easy task, right? And in order for us to facilitate these kind of new age pharma companies, or let me call it study sponsors, Intel is working with the ecosystem to put up workflow, what you see in this current slide, right? Where the intent of this workflow is to put the patients at the center of the medical R&D, right? As you can see here, you have the hospitals which has access to these multimodal data set, right? And also access to the patients in case we need to collect new data or do clinical trials of a new diagnostic device or a new therapy, right? So they have access to the cohort. And what we do with this pipeline, and I've broken it down into 4 ingredients, and I'll explain. Ingredient 1 is the hospital, which is the custodian of the data set or the connect to the patient. Ingredient 2 is to publish of the data that is available with these hospitals, so that study sponsors, who are ingredient 4, they are able to discover the kind of data and patient that they're interested in and request access all digitally, right? Wherever they are across the globe, right? And once the request is granted, then it comes into a platform, the requested data, and you have 2 modes of operation, data mode and patient mode, where you get to have access to the data that is requested, or a patient from whom you can collect prospectively new data. And based on these data that gets collected, the pharma company can come up with the insights, which helps them to get IPs in diagnostic and therapeutic space. And what Intel does is that are typically used in the health and life science space, run efficiently on this platform so that you get a meaningful IP out as an outcome. And then we also support clinical trials using the same platform. So I see clearance before deploying the solution, the translational outcome back into the clinical space, whether it's a diagnostic IP, efficient diagnostic IP, or a new therapeutic IP, right? Now, if you look at this entire solution, this is sort of going to help the new age pharma companies like in silico. I'm just giving in silico as an example. There are many that's brewing, so that they get to have access to the data, multimodal data, precisely for the disease condition that they want, in a seamless manner, in a clean, curated manner. But while we are able to offer this as a total platform service that they can benefit from, and we move up the ladder, as opposed to just selling silicon, we move up the ladder to the services space. Now, another example that I wanted to cite is the population scale screening. In the previous example that I quoted for helping the new age pharma is for people who are already with a certain disease, right? People come to hospitals with a certain disease condition already manifested. But if you want to capture disease at a very early stage, right? I'm talking 5 years, 10 years early to the actual onset, the manifestations very clearly visible. Then you need to get into the scale of population scale screening that can lead us into more precision diagnostics and therapeutics. And towards this effort, we are putting up this vision in the context of the Technology Incubator Hub collaboration with IIIT Hyderabad, right? Where Intel is the industry partner and TIH programs are DST funded, right? And they have a sufficiently large fund in excess of 100 crores over a period of 5 years, with Intel contributing 20% of that. Wherein this is a Section 8 company where we tend to use this 5-year period to build IPs so that this can stay alive as a company beyond 5 years with the IP-based income revenues coming in. Now, in this context, we are working to build up this larger vision of population scale screening. And the intent here is to do, as you can see on the picture on the left, a funnel-shaped data collection, starting with simple pre-screening methods of physical examination, answering to certain questions, and collecting body parameters non-invasively. So we are working with a company called Blue Semi, wherein they are able to collect non-invasive methods, blood glucose, ECG, BP, SPO, able to funnel based on the insight into some of these 6 disease verticals that we have, including cancer, neurodegenerative, cardiovascular, diabetes, mental, and communicable diseases, so that we can then get into the next level of limited clinical and laboratory examination for 50,000 patients, starting with 1 million for the questionnaire and body parameters and physical examination, down to 50K. As you can imagine, as you go down the funnel, the cost of getting the data increases. So the funnel, and that's the reason why it's a funnel. Then get into 20% of that 50K, get into detailed clinical and laboratory examination, and subsequently getting into omics data collection. And the reason why we want to do is to root cause the causal agents for these diseases that can help us to come up with precision diagnostics. An example could be panel sequencing, but also precision therapeutics. And I often give this example of for lung cancer. We're working with a company, a startup in the US, where they have identified genetic therapy for lung cancer. So it's a simple technology where the genetic scissors are embedded into a lipid nanoparticle. It's inhaled like an asthma drug. It goes and does the genetic edits on the cancer cell, and thereby rectifying the problem, right, in situ. So these are things that are going to come in the next 3, 4, 5 years time frame, right? So precision therapeutics, precision diagnostics, based on the causal analysis that we perform on the multimodal data set that we collect for each of these 6 disease verticals. So that's our bigger vision, right? And why omics? And that's since you're all so closely tied to genomics and omics, I don't need to, explain to you folks, but this single slide from Protai, thanks to their source, clearly explains and articulates the connects between various layers of genome, transcriptome, proteome, in order for you to come up with a causal understanding on this multi-layered knowledge graph, if you will, right? So that you can root cause the causal agent or agents, so that you can come up with better therapeutics and better diagnostic methods, right? And that's the reason why we go down to the omics. And this sort of, the next slide really gets into the details of what all data are we going to collect at various levels, right, for each of the disease verticals, right, for screening, pre-screening, screening, diagnostics, and omics. And beyond that, with the TIH program, we are working to build a protein ligand data set. And this is a data set of about 100,000 protein ligands, better than the PDP bind, better in terms of total number of protein ligands, but also in terms of the quality of the data set. And we are also building up a potential partnership with a 3D molecular data set. And this is a data set which looks at the structural aspects of the insulated genomic neighborhood, which is the topologically associating domains. And this will help us come up with better genomic therapy. So we are looking at both small molecule based therapy as well as genomic based therapy. And based on this multimodal data set that we'll get out of this funnel and these protein ligand and genomic data sets, we will be able to charter our therapeutic programs to come up with precision medicine, right? And for all of these stack to collect the data to its underlying, right, which is AI, machine learning, deep learning, bioinformatics, knowledge graphs, molecular modeling, tools like OpenMM, GROMACS, NAMD. So these are standard stuff that Intel are optimizing on their hardware, right? But we want to build this population scale data set so that we get into the space of IPs, right? To be able to generate more revenue streams as opposed to just being able to just sell silicon. As a sort of a slice into this funnel, I'm going to just show you a case for CVD, for the cardiovascular disease, which is one of the prominent ones in India. And you can also see the numbers that sort of say why it's relevant even in beyond Indian geography. In the US, the kind of cost attributed to managing CVDs is, almost, $350 billion. This was way back in 2015. Now, one of the things interesting to see here is the challenge in the outcome. Now, you can come up with best panels of biomarkers to identify CVDs and even early biomarkers. But the biggest challenge is in implementing them, in the clinic in a timely and cost-effective manner, right? And these are areas that we want to focus on to identify the disease early enough so that, a case like oral cancer, if we can screen them early and identify the lesions, the oral lesions early, a simple vitamin supplement is good enough to get the guy recover from the disease, right? And vitamin supplements are just tens of rupees, and it's a complete cure. So the quality of life post treatment is excellent, as opposed to the chemotherapy, radiotherapy, which is like bleaching and leaching the patient, right? Now we have laid out a vision with a roadmap of key results. So to really hit 1 million target data size for all these 6 disease verticals. And we're looking to create novel diagnostic IPs in the next 5 years, and also novel therapeutic IPs in the next 5 years. And we will create open data set grand challenges so that broader public institutions which are focused on research, like the IITs, IITs, but also other institutions like yours, can play a role in getting part of these. Looking at to collect this population scale data set in the state of Telangana, right? We're working with NGOs like Care Foundation. We're talking to PHFI, Hyderabad, and probably in the next quarter or so, we'll put in place a mechanism to collect large scale population scale data set as illustrated in this funnel. And the intent is that, if with this kind of a data set, we'll be able to not only identify patients early in the disease cycle, but also come up with better therapeutic mechanisms, cheaper therapeutic mechanisms, so that the population at large can, benefit from it. So that's a big a change in the way of thinking, right? And evolving away from just a space where we can create new IPs or earn revenues through services, right? And that's a big shift in the thinking process. And I would put down 2 slides on the takeaways for ecosystem collaborators, right? If you look at the key takeaways, technology enablers, we really want to standardize computational workflows, and that's been before as well. So we want to continue on that. What we want to build on is, as I mentioned, we are looking at workflows with collaborators that will put patient at the center of medical R&D. And I showed you one of the workflows that we are working with the ecosystem. And also to get access to population scale, clean, curated, multimodal data set. Whatever technology is needed to enable this, Intel will work with the ecosystem. And what we are anticipating as outcomes is early biomarkers-based screening of diseases, precision diagnostics and therapeutics, cost-effective and accessible technologies, right? It doesn't matter if you make it precision, but if it is not accessible and it's also not cost-effective, then the impact on Indian market is minimal, right? And that's also an angle that we are looking at. And it's, I just illustrated the case with, you know, new age pharma or new age drug company as a use case, but there are many more use cases that we are looking at: digital twin, digital hospital, elderly care at home, more, right, in the total, you know, overall healthcare and life science space. Questions, Aradhita, over to you.
Thank you, Aris, for that wonderful talk and taking us through the different ventures of Intel. So yeah, maybe before we, I mean, I've already written that people can, you know, kind of type in their questions and we'll be able to address them. But if you go to the next slide, I mean, I'll take the first opportunity. If you go to the next slide. Yeah, so I did not quite understand. I mean, these are the areas that you would like to, you know, kind of move ahead with or something?
Yeah, so these are areas that we are interested in collaborations, right? So digital twin, digital hospital, and other aspects at home kind of care, right? Whether it's elderly care, post-operative recovery. There are groups within Intel that are looking into some of these aspects, right? So what I showcased to you is with one example of drug discovery and better diagnostic methods, right? So better diagnostics and better therapeutics. But that's not the be all and end all in healthcare, right? So there are other things as well. Things like digital twin, digital hospital. So these are all some other components, critical components that will emerge in this coming decade, right? So we are interested in working on these. Some of the works are already started, so to speak, right? So if there are any ideas that people can come up with in terms of broader collaboration, I would be open to, discuss further.
Right. Thank you. We will be happy to discuss more about this. Anyways, moving back to the questions. So this is from Priyanki. She's asking, if possible, please could you share a model or example that looks at early warning systems of infectious disease or the possibilities of setting this kind of model in India?
Oh, I think you have a person who is working on it day and night on that topic, Rajesh Pandey. So he has been working with me on this topic of microlabs. We are setting up a microlabs at IIIT Hyderabad. So if you have infectious disease early warning system, that's the way to go, right? Because trying to take samples of patients from districts in India and in a periodic manner, trying in various seasons of the year, so to speak, so that you can keep track of all the microbes that are prevalent and be able to come up with cost-effective, panel sequencing that is easy to deploy, right? Because as I said, it should be made accessible. So we're looking at use of Oxford Nanopore, for example, the long read sequencing device for deployment. So these are things that we are definitely looking at to create a heat map across India as a dashboard for the health ministry to be able to operate. But from to get to that kind of a dashboard to where we stand today, we have to climb hundreds of steps, right? And it's not something that you can leap forward in one day. So we are trying to build, and Rajesh is already working on several micro labs on the same principle, and we are adding one to that kitty so that we learn comprehensively and be able to, come up with solutions that that can have deeper impact on infectious diseases.
Right. Thank you. And there's another question from Anurag Raj. He's saying, hello, RS, interesting talk. Intel is doing an impressive in collaboration and hardware development in biological area, but the evolution between computational biological tools and computational architecture has still a large gap. Can you comment on how Intel can assist or already working on in minimizing this gap?
Yeah, very good question, Anurag. So there are two things that we are looking at. One is to understand the workloads working with the ecosystem as they evolve, right? So that we can feed into the architectures, the compute architectures, so that they can evolve alongside. So that's one approach. Another is, as I said, from a thought process, we are moving away from just selling silicon to getting into services. So if there is another company that has a better compute solution, but we stand to gain by deploying a combination of our compute with third-party compute to come up with an overall compute infrastructure which is cost effective, so that when we get into a services-based business model, our cost of ownership to deliver those services is minimized, right? So that's another angle that we are looking at. And if that entails that we bring on board some of the third-party solutions that are more efficient for certain class of workloads, we will, right? So there are two approaches and we are pursuing both. Hope that answers your question, Anurag.
Yeah. The next one is from Purti Katpalia. She is asking, I wanted to ask about the CSR funding for science outreach for underprivileged kids. Is that something that Intel India supports or would be keen to support?
So it depends on what is the scope that you want to associate.
Sorry, your network is, your voice is breaking actually.
Addressing the outreach to the underprivileged kids, right? If it is educational or it is, can you hear me still?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Is it audible?
Yeah, it's better now.
Yeah, is it audible now?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
No, I was just saying, it depends on what the kind of outreach that you're looking at, science outreach for underprivileged kids. Is it education or is it, in general health? A lot depends on that. Of course, Intel CSR funding goes into education for sure, right? For underprivileged kids. Definitely we can look at it. It depends on what the scope is.
She's asking for education.
Yeah, so education for sure. We are already doing so, Aradhita.
Okay, right. Thank you. And Dr. Rajesh Pandey was wondering whether there is any focus areas of pandemic preparedness.
No, I think it has to evolve, Rajesh, with the microlab concept into a dashboard that is a countrywide dashboard. I don't think we can jump 100 steps ahead, right? We have to, because the foundations need to be strong, right, on which we build these steps. And I think the micro labs is, and also the mega labs that you have at the airports and so on, is a way to build that strong foundation and leading us into that kind of a countrywide dashboard, which would be an end state that I can think of, which can prepare the health ministry to address any such pandemic more efficiently, right? But having said that, I do have one other point, which I think is a food for thought. We all know that how China has been able to do a complete lockdown and, for a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, a month, and completely get the number of positive cases to zero in that period of time so that it doesn't spread? Meaning, are there certain lessons beyond the technology that can play a critical role in pandemic preparedness? I think we should look at both vectors. Technology is one piece. Of course, as scientists, we all would love to come up with technology solutions. But I think there is also a solution beyond technology which can be far more impactful as well. Maybe some lessons from China definitely needs attention here.
Right. Aris, if you don't mind, we can come out of the screen share mode, right? Before taking the other questions.
Yeah, is the slides are still?
Yes.
I see.
Dr. Bapi Raju is asking, thanks, Aris. Comprehensive presentation and apt under the webinar series. One general question. What we clearly see is the need for industry, research lab, academia, clinical institute connect. What are your thoughts on how these three entities work together to make these a reality? Ecosystems are quite different. Practices are different. What are your experiences and some takeaways from that?
Yeah, good question, Bapi. So this is the example that I showed with the workflow for collecting, curating, and publishing metadata to help study sponsors discover data that are currently lying in silos at various hospitals and diagnostic labs is a step in that direction, right? A collaboration between the clinical community, the medical industry, the pharma, the medtech industry, research labs which want to identify new IPs based on the data, which can be a private research or academia, right? So all of these are coming together, and we are offering this kind of, we're working towards offering this kind of a total solution so that it's seamless for a study sponsor to sit in one place in, can be any remote place in any part of the world, and be able to get access to the kind of data or patient to get deeper into understanding the disease and coming up with new insights, right? And that's precisely the reason why we are working in this direction, because today these are all working in silos, right? People have data, people have methods to find out and through the database analysis, find out what are the kind of subset data that some study sponsors want. People like us, Intel, who have the compute and technology to run these workloads, and people who are study sponsors who are sitting elsewhere, like big pharma and medtech companies, right? So through this workflow, we are seamlessly integrating all of them into one, so that each one gets to focus on their strength, as opposed to a pharma company sitting and cleaning data and curating data, right? Which is none of their business. So I think we are moving in the direction. It's not something that exists today. We are building one, and I'm sure in the next years to come, you will see compelling solutions that facilitate this kind of workflows, which will make it seamless and ensure that productivity is high. Hope
right,
that
that's
answers.
exactly what we were, talking about, that the support, the stakeholders of research have, the paradigm has changed, and how people integrate have changed, and that kind of a role.
Yeah.
Aris, we are still on your slides.
Oh, I don't know what, I have unshared. I don't know why it's...
No problem. The next question is from Dr. Alpana Dave. She's saying, nice talk. With the population screening, what kind of collaboration are you looking at? We maintain a population cohort which can be used for longitudinal studies. Is that something that Intel India might be interested in supporting?
Yeah, so when I say population scale, right, I want to clarify. So we are picking up districts and looking through the population as a single entity, right? Not a population of a specific disease. So if you're talking about a specific disease like a neurodegenerative disorder or a diabetes, and they are all scattered across the country, right? That's not the kind of population scale that we're looking at. We are focused on a single district or a couple of districts, collect all the data, and try and find out from those pre-screening data how many patients are, or how many individuals are potential patients of various disease verticals. So that's the approach that we take to building up that cohort. And they are going to be longitudinal studies, right? It's not a one point because by definition, cohort means that it's a two-way communication, right? They get to provide data for research, and we get to provide, potential treatments and better diagnostics for them, right? At the end of the day, nobody wants to share data for free. So they have to benefit some way or the other. We are looking into those as well. So it's going to be longitudinal. It'll serve the needs of the disease patients, right? At the same time, we are looking at the entire population as an entity, because this population, there can be beyond the genetic parameters, the food that we eat, the air that we breathe, the water that we drink can have also influence, right? So there are parameters that typically are neglected often play a critical role in what we become, right? So that's a dimension that we are looking at as well. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Dr. Rentu Kutum has the next question. Awesome talk and great initiatives. Is there any project where Intel is working in patient-centric collective effort in disease like cancer, clinical oncologist, immunologist, scientist, genomic experts, to understand complex interplay from cell to organism level, like deep cancer biology for heterogeneous patients?
Absolutely. And the funnel that I showed you is an effort to collect multimodal data set, including omics, right? Definitely for deeper understanding of the biology and the disease manifestation and how it manifests at various stages of the disease cycle. We definitely need all the experts that you mentioned, right? Beyond all the data that we need. And this is an effort, and I'm looking towards IGIB also to play a role. We are in discussion with a couple of faculties in this regard, and also beyond IGIB as well. Definitely, I think all the experts are needed and all the different data are needed in order for us to make for a meaningful insight from it. And such a district level data population scale does not exist anywhere else in the world, right? The kind of thing that we are painting.
Thank you, Iris, for the wonderful talk and taking time out to come here and answer everybody's questions. And that I don't think there are any further questions. So we come to a close of this webinar. And thank you so much again. Thank you for all the participants and attendees who are here. We'll be back again next month with another partner. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.